We're joined by Professor Aap Dijksterhuis. He's a psychology professor at Radboud University in the Netherlands. Professor, it's really a pleasure to speak with you. I first read about your work in Jonah Lehrer's book, How We Decide, and I did more research, and you have these two different experiments that you've did with people and decision-making logic. One that involves two possible home purchases, and then the other which involves automobile purchases. Let's start with the automobile experiment that you did. To give our audience a sense of what that involved.
When I started to be interested in decision making and in decision making research, I discovered that the emphasis in almost all models and theories is on conscious thought. The idea is that the more you consciously deliberate, the better your decisions will get. And we thought at the time this may to some extent be true, but this cannot be the entire story. And what we did is we had people choose between various hypothetical cars under different conditions. So under some conditions, people would receive the information about the hypothetical cars and then decide immediately. And under other conditions, people were given the information about the cars and then they could consciously think for quite a while. And in the third condition, we did something new and something we found interesting. We gave people the information about the cars. Then we told them later you will have to make a decision, but now we're actually going to do something else. And they were occupied with just some fun task that took a while and that was occupying conscious thought. And the idea was that while they were doing this, they would engage in what we have called unconscious thought. And under these conditions, it turned out people, at least under some circumstances, make the best decisions. Sometimes unconscious thought is actually better than conscious thought, especially when it comes to rather complex decisions that involve a lot of information.
So what it turned out with the car setup was that there was one vehicle which was I don't know that I want to use the term, the correct
we
choice.
The information, we constructed the information in such a way that there were four cars and one was made more attractive than the others, but this was not immediately apparent because all cars were described by many different aspects. So the total set of information was actually quite large.
So am I correct in saying that even though the kind of conventional wisdom might suggest the more research, the more information you have about something, and the more time you take to make a decision, your decision would be better informed, but there seems to be kind of a diminishing marginal returns to information, does there not? In other words, when you start weighing too many factors in a decision, people actually started making a wrong decision.
That's very often true. It's not always the case that more information necessarily leads to a better decision. And it's especially true if you only base your decision on conscious deliberation. If you add a period of what we call unconscious thought to a period of conscious deliberation, your decision is generally much better.
Let me put up another different scenario. It's interesting because you are a collector of single malt whiskey, as you have behind you, and my producer here believes he does some bartending and he believes himself to be a bit of a connoisseur when it comes to liquor as well. And we have seen countless of these blind taste tests with both, wine, vodka, etc. And the information seems to indicate that people, when they are actually given a true blind taste test, can't really identify the more expensive wine or the more expensive vodka. However, once you put a price tag there, people start to think that the more expensive whatever it is we're talking about is actually better. Talk a little bit about how that plays into the experiments you do. My producer's convinced he would be able to determine the better vodka.
Well, I guess it all shows that the expectations we have largely and also unconsciously determines how we experience drinking wine or whiskey or whatever, and also what we think the quality is. I've actually done such small experiments on whiskey festivals, and people are indeed extremely poor at blind taste tests. It's hard to convince people that they are so poor that people generally do not believe it. It's nice to believe in the illusion that you're actually good at this. Often the only way to get people to believe in how poor they are doing is to have them do a blind taste test, and then they are forced to admit that they're really not very good at it. It's a good example of how our thoughts and also our decision-making processes are influenced by all kinds of unconscious processes, things we are not aware of.
So I want to go along those lines to the example of the house choices. So a common scenario that we present is people are looking at two houses. They are both the same price. One is a 10-minute drive from their work, and it is a slightly smaller house. The other is out in the suburbs. It's a 45-minute commute to work, but it has one extra room and maybe a half bathroom. It's a bigger house. Both are the same price. It turns out, and correct me if I'm wrong, the longer people think about the decision, the more likely they are to opt for the house that's bigger and in the suburbs. And a year later, the more likely they are to regret that decision. Is that correct?
Yes, there's definitely reasons to believe that. There's no scientific study, I think, that shows that incredibly solidly. But yes, what we tend to often do when we make a decision such as this choice between these two houses is we use conscious deliberation not to be critical, which is what we should do. We use conscious deliberation to sort of verify or validate our first intuition. So we see that large house and we love it. And what do? We start to find reasons so that we can actually tell ourselves and other people around us that it's actually a very good idea to buy that house. And that, of course, leads to regret. In that case also, it's a much better strategy to consciously deliberate, but not too much, and add a period of unconscious thought. And in this case, with a real house, I would say days or maybe even a week of unconscious thought. So that if there are doubts somewhere, they have time to surface, and this can sometimes lead people to at the very end not make the wrong choices they were about to make.
The question I had when I looked at that at those studies was a question of causation versus correlation, because isn't it possible that those who are already more dissatisfied with their jobs would opt for the house that's further away, and a year later report that they are less happy, but they were already less happy with their job? I mean, sometimes with these it's hard to parse out correlation and causation, isn't it?
Yes, that's definitely true. Yeah. I would say the general problem with decision-making research is that we can do all these controlled lab studies so that we know it's causation rather than correlation. But these studies are not really about the very important decisions that we make in real life. Alternatively, we can do field studies, and those can be about these really important, big decisions we make in real life. But then, of course, the correlation versus causation question kicks in. So it's the best way to do it is actually, if you study a new phenomenon, to try it both ways. Go to the lab and do a field study. But with these big field studies, you're right. You can never be 100% sure.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Professor Dijksterhuis. He is a psychology professor at Radboud University in the Netherlands. Really fascinating work that you're doing, and it's a pleasure to speak with you about this.
Thank you.